Welcome to Family Basics 101. I'm Dr. Bruce McClure, and as we continue our 5-part series entitled Sex, today we will talk about how to talk to your children about the topic of sex. In many communities, when children reach the age of 12 to about 16, parents begin to notice many changes beginning to take place within the child, be they male or female. In the female, normally it's when the menstrual cycle begins for girls, and when the boys begin to have those nocturnal discharges, parents then begin to say, it's time for someone, many times referring to someone other than the parent, to have the talk with the child. Imagine in your mind that 12 years have expired, and for the first time, a parent decides to talk to a child about sex. 12 years. The child is 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, and now the parent decides it's time for the talk. Well, what do you talk about? What do you say? How comfortable are you? And by the way, what do the birds and the bees have to do with talking to your child about sex? Is sex only about doing pollination to plants and having little baby birds in a nest? So what does this talk and what does the birds and the bees have to do with parents talking to their children about the topic of who they are? Talking to children about sex should really begin as early as infancy, with parents modeling verbally and non-verbally to the child who they really are. Remember, we talked about sex not being an act, but sex being the person. It's who you are. It's who your child is. And as early as the child enters the world, you begin teaching your child appropriately about who they are as a sexual individual. You begin by the little baby talk with your children. This is my baby boy. This is my baby girl. And instead of all of the goo-goo gaga that the child has no idea even when they turn 12, 13 years old, what goo-goo gaga means, rather begin early saying to that little boy, you're my baby boy. Saying to that little girl, you're my baby girl. Saying to that little boy, that little girl, that they are precious and that they're loved and that they're wanted. This is a child. Remind that infant, you're my child. You're bone of my bone. You're flesh of my flesh. What you're really doing in the early infant years is talking to your child about sex. Changing the diapers, touching appropriately, redirecting the child's touching of themselves. The children with the diaper off begins to fondle themselves, and you redirect their hands. You don't slap their hands, but you're teaching your child in early childhood about the sexual them. Training the child early on in hygiene. Teaching the children early to have a respect for males and to have a respect for female boundaries. Teaching the little children, little boys, don't go into the bathroom if mommy's in the toilet. Teach the little girls, if daddy is using the toilet, don't go in there. You set those boundaries. If your 2 to 3 year old is using the toilet, you model to them the privacy that they deserve. If they are taking a bath or they're trying to shower, you appropriately teach them how not to allow just anyone to walk in on them, because they are precious and they are sexual beings, male or female. Redirecting appropriate interactions between boys and girls. Little boys 5, 6, 7 years old begin to interact in a more social way outside the home, and we'll build on this shortly. But it's not unusual for those little boys and little girls on the playgrounds to start, you show me yours, I'll show you mine. It's the parents, it's the supervisors who redirects that behavior appropriately and teach the children early on that that is not appropriate behavior. Reinforcing what is good, bad touch to boys and girls who by the age of 8 to 10, they just want to please other adults and their peers. But you start early on teaching those little children about how to hug, how to embrace, what is appropriate, what's not appropriate. But you start talking to your children early in the process. Not wait until they're 12, 13, 14 years old to begin to discuss what many calls the birds and the bees and having the talk. When children are 2 to 3, model before each child appropriate respect coming from mommy and daddy toward the children. Teach your child how to sit. Teach the little boys it's not okay to walk around with no shirt on in the home. Teach the little girl that it's not okay to walk around the home just with nothing on the top. Model before the child that they are precious. And when they are older, they will have that expectation that they are precious in the midst of other people. When a child is 4 to 6 years old and they begin to venture outside the home into education or child care, for the next 10 to 12 years, the child from about 5 years old is going to have to take some type teaching with him or her about who they are sexually. So therefore, it becomes the parent's responsibility to start teaching the child sooner than later who they are. In most countries, China, North Korea, South Korea, Australia, Kenya, children go off to school by the time they're 5 years old. And children must go off to school with an understanding of who they are sexually. In the book of Genesis 22, verses 5 through 8, there's a story about Abraham and his son Isaac, who takes a journey up to worship God. And Abraham has been told by God to offer his son as the sacrifice. When they get up the hill and the lad begins to understand he's carrying the wood and his father is carrying the fire, the lad asks his father a question about sacrifice. He says, "Daddy, I understand I'm carrying the wood and you're carrying the fire, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" This is a child that understood if we're going to have an offering to God, there's a lamb involved. But he already knew about the lamb before they went to the sacrifice. I'll see you in class again tomorrow. Don't be late and don't skip class.